Welcome to 13th Hour Tales, where we uncover the stories that lurk in the shadows. Tonight's tale takes us to the quaint town of Oakhaven, where a beloved family's dark secret changed everything. This is The Town Loved the Kestrels until the well behind their home was emptied. The darkness that hides behind a smile is often the most terrifying of all. Not the monster that growls and bares its teeth, but the one that brings you cookies, remembers your birthday, and helps your children with their homework. The horror that waits behind kind eyes and generous hands. The evil that comes not with a warning, but with a housewarming gift and an offer to volunteer at the local school. This is the story of such a darkness, one that settled into the heart of a community and made itself at home. A darkness that didn't announce itself with thunder and lightning, but with pancake breakfasts and 4th of July floats. A darkness that the town of Oakhaven didn't recognize until it was far too late. Before we begin this journey into the shadows of seemingly ordinary life, a word of caution. What follows may disturb you, not because it's grotesque or supernatural, but because it explores the most frightening question of all. How well do we really know the people we welcome into our lives? The neighbor who waters your plants when you're away? The family whose children play with yours? The friendly faces you see every day and never think to question? The events you're about to hear unfold like a nightmare that begins as a pleasant dream. A cautionary tale about trust given too freely and signs overlooked too easily. It's a reminder that sometimes the real monsters aren't hiding under the bed or in the closet. They're sitting across from you at the dinner table, passing the salt and asking about your day. The town of Oakhaven, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, was far from the chaos of city life. With just over 3,000 residents, it was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where 4th of July barbecues brought the entire community together, and where a stranger couldn't walk down Main Street without being greeted at least a dozen times. Oakhaven prided itself on its close-knit community, its historical architecture dating back to the 1800s, and most importantly, its sense of collective trust. The town had that picture-perfect quality that made it seem like it belonged on a postcard or in a holiday movie. Maple trees lined the streets, their leaves creating a vibrant canopy of reds and golds in autumn. The town square featured a gazebo where concerts were held on summer evenings, and an ancient clock tower that had marked time for generations of Oakhaven residents. Main Street was dotted with family-owned businesses, a hardware store passed down through 4 generations, a bakery famous for its sourdough bread, a bookshop with creaking wooden floors, and the perpetual scent of old paper and fresh coffee. Time moved differently in Oakhaven. While the outside world rushed forward at a frenetic pace, life here maintained a comfortable rhythm, marked by seasonal festivals, high school football games, and the familiar routines of small-town existence. Crime was virtually non-existent. Sheriff Elias Caldwell's biggest concerns typically involved teenage pranks or the occasional dispute between neighbors over property lines or barking dogs. It was the kind of place where you didn't have to lock your doors at night, Sheriff Caldwell would later recall, his voice tinged with both nostalgia and regret. People left their keys in their cars. If someone needed something, they'd borrow it and return it with a thank you note or a batch of cookies. We trusted each other because we knew each other, or at least we thought we did. That trust, that bone-deep certainty that your neighbors were fundamentally decent people, was what defined Oakhaven. It was also what made the town uniquely vulnerable to what was coming. When the Kestrels arrived in Oakhaven in the spring of 2008, the town welcomed them with open arms. Silas and Alara Kestrel, along with their 2 children, 15-year-old Lyra and 12-year-old Julian, moved into the old Victorian house on Willow Lane. The house had stood empty for nearly a decade after the previous owners, the elderly Hawthorns, passed away without any heirs to claim the property. The Kestrels were the perfect addition to Oakhaven's community tapestry. Silas, a successful remote software developer, quickly established himself as a generous patron of local businesses. He'd spend hours at Mabel's cafe, buying coffee for whoever walked in while he worked on his laptop. Ilara, a former art teacher, volunteered at the local elementary school, bringing creativity and color to the children's education. The Kestrel children were equally delightful. Lyra joined the high school debate team and led them to the state finals in her first year. Julian became known for his kind nature, often seen helping elderly neighbors carry groceries or mow their lawns. The Kestrels were a godsend, recalled Martha Vance, who owned the local bakery. Ilara would come in every Saturday morning for fresh sourdough, and she always had time to listen to my troubles. When my arthritis got so bad I couldn't knead the dough properly, she organized a fundraiser for my medical bills. They raised enough for me to get the treatment I needed and to hire an assistant. That's just who they were. Kind, thoughtful people who seemed to genuinely care. Sheriff Elias Caldwell echoed the sentiment. In my 30 years of law enforcement in Oakhaven, I'd never seen a family integrate so seamlessly into our community. Silas would organize these tech workshops for the older folks, teaching them how to video call their grandkids or use online banking. He never made anyone feel stupid for not knowing. He had this way about him, patient, understanding. The Kestrels' Victorian home on Willow Lane was soon transformed from a decaying relic to the crown jewel of the neighborhood. Silas and Ilara poured their savings into restoring the house to its former glory, repainting the intricate gingerbread trim in vibrant colors, replacing broken stained glass windows, and cultivating an English garden that drew admirers from 3 counties over. Behind the house, partially hidden by a grove of ancient oak trees, sat an old stone well. It was a remnant from the days before Oakhaven had a municipal water system, a charming historical feature that added to the property's character. The well was sealed with a heavy wooden cover, which Silas reinforced shortly after moving in, citing safety concerns for the neighborhood children who often played in their expansive backyard. That well was ancient, said Harold Jenkins, Oakhaven's unofficial historian. Dating back to the 1850s, when the property was originally owned by Oakhaven's founder, Jeremiah Thorne. Legend had it that the water from that well had special properties. Some said it tasted a little sweeter than any other water in the county. Others claimed it had healing properties. Old-timers used to talk about how livestock that drank from it lived longer, produced more milk. Just superstitions, of course, but the Kestrels seemed interested in those stories. Silas asked me a lot of questions about the well's history. For nearly 3 years, the Kestrels were the heart and soul of Oakhaven. They hosted elaborate Halloween parties where the entire town was invited. Their Christmas light display became a regional attraction. Silas established a scholarship fund for Oakhaven High School graduates pursuing STEM careers. Ilara started an art therapy program for troubled youth. The Kestrel children excelled in school and extracurricular activities, becoming role models for their peers. Those were golden days, reminisced Principal Donna Fletcher of Oakhaven High. We'd never had such involved parents. They attended every school function, volunteered for every committee. When our computer lab needed updating, Silas not only donated the equipment, but installed it himself and trained our staff. When the drama department needed costumes for the spring musical, Ilara stayed up for nights, designing and sewing them. They were everywhere, helping everyone, asking for nothing in return. But beneath the surface of this perfect family portrait, subtle oddities began to emerge. Observant residents noticed peculiar patterns in the Kestrels' behavior. They never invited anyone inside their home beyond the ground floor. The second and third stories, with their ornate bay windows and mysterious drawn curtains, remained off-limits to visitors. During their lavish garden parties, guests would occasionally catch Silas or Ilara slipping away to check on something inside the house, returning minutes later with forced smiles and vague explanations. I remember asking Alara if I could use their upstairs bathroom during a garden party, said Diane Lewis, who taught with Alara at the elementary school. The downstairs one had a line. She froze for a second, then laughed it off, saying the upstairs was a disaster area with their renovation project. She practically dragged me to the pool house to use that bathroom instead. It struck me as strange, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Everyone's entitled to their privacy. Another peculiarity was the Kestrels' insistence on handling their own waste management. They declined to connect to Oakhaven's sewage system, citing the historical value of maintaining the property's original systems. They had a private company deliver large amounts of chemicals monthly, which Silas explained were for treating their septic system and the swimming pool they'd installed in the backyard. The chemical deliveries seemed excessive, noted Roger Wilson, who lived across the street. I worked in pool maintenance for 20 years before retiring, and I know how much you need for a residential pool. They were getting 5-6 times that amount. But Silas had an explanation for everything. Something about the specific pH balance of their soil requiring special treatment. He was a smart guy, used a lot of technical jargon. Who was I to question him? The Kestrels were also known for their frequent trips. Every few months, the family would disappear for a week or two, offering varied explanations for their absences, visiting Alara's sick mother in Oregon, attending technology conferences for Silas's work, taking educational trips for the children. They always returned with souvenirs for their neighbors and fascinating stories of their travels. Looking back, their trips always coincided with when people started asking too many questions, Sheriff Caldwell later reflected. When the environmental inspector got complaints about strange odors coming from their property, suddenly, the Kestrels were off to Yellowstone for a family vacation. When neighbors reported hearing unusual sounds late at night, the family took an impromptu trip to Europe for a month. We never connected the dots until it was too late. Despite these peculiarities, the town's admiration for the Kestrels remained unshaken. They had brought so much good to Oakhaven that any eccentricities were easily overlooked or rationalized. If they valued their privacy, if they had strange hobbies or interests, what did it matter? They were generous, kind, and seemed to genuinely care about the well-being of the community. It wasn't until the unseasonably heavy rains of October 2011 that the truth began to surface, quite literally. The storm that hit Oakhaven that autumn was unprecedented. Over 2 weeks, the town received the equivalent of 6 months' worth of rainfall. Creeks overflowed, basements flooded, and the ground became saturated, unable to absorb more water. On Willow Lane, the situation was particularly dire. The topography of the area meant that water flowed downhill toward the Kestrels' property, pooling in their backyard where the old well stood. On the night of October 17th, as the rain continued to pound against windows and thunder shook the foundations of homes, a sinkhole formed around the old well behind the Kestrels' house. The waterlogged ground, combined with whatever structural compromises had been made to the well over the years, gave way. The heavy wooden cover that Silas had installed collapsed inward, and the walls of the well began to crumble. By morning, neighbors noticed a strange odor permeating the air, a terrible stench that seemed to emanate from the Kestrels' property. Concerned calls flooded the sheriff's office, but the Kestrels themselves were nowhere to be found. Their cars were gone from the driveway, their phones went straight to voicemail, and their usual prompt responses to community messages were conspicuously absent. "I knew something was wrong when Alara didn't show up for our morning walk," said Beatrice Hammond, who lived next door. "In 3 years, she'd never missed it without calling first. Then I smelled that odor. It was like nothing I'd ever encountered, like death and chemicals mixed together. I called the sheriff immediately." Sheriff Caldwell arrived at the Kestrels' property with 2 deputies around 9 a.m. What they found in the backyard would haunt them and the town of Oakhaven for years to come. The old well had partially collapsed, creating a gaping hole about 8 feet in diameter. But it wasn't a typical well anymore. The original stone shaft extended down about 20 feet before opening into what appeared to be a man-made cavern. As the floodwaters receded, they had left behind a grotesque tableau that defied rational explanation. I've been in law enforcement for 3 decades, Sheriff Caldwell would later testify. I've seen car accidents, homicides, natural deaths in all states of decomposition. Nothing prepared me for what we found in that well. The cavern beneath the Kestrel property contained the remains of at least 17 individuals in various states of decomposition. Some were little more than skeletons, suggesting they had been there for years, possibly predating the Kestrel's arrival. Others were more recent, still recognizable. Most disturbing were the signs of methodical preservation attempts, bodies submerged in chemical baths, others wrapped in plastic with crude tubing systems attached to them, apparently designed to circulate preservative chemicals. The sheriff immediately declared the property a crime scene and called in the State Bureau of Investigation. As news spread through Oakhaven, shock and disbelief gave way to horror and betrayal. The family that had been embraced, celebrated, and loved by the entire community was suddenly revealed to be harboring unimaginable secrets. As investigators combed through the Kestrel house, the full extent of the family's deception came to light. The sealed-off upper floors had been converted into a macabre laboratory. Journals detailed Silas and Ilara's experiments in human preservation and reanimation. Photographs documented their work, showing the progression of their techniques. Most chilling were the recordings, hundreds of hours of video and audio in which the Kestrels calmly discussed their subjects, their methods, and their failures. The most disturbing aspect wasn't just the evidence of murder, explained Special Agent Lena Rodriguez, who led the SBI investigation. It was the clinical detachment with which they approached it. These weren't crimes of passion. The Kestrels were conducting what they viewed as scientific research. They saw their victims as subjects, specimens to be studied. Amazing. The investigation revealed that the Kestrels had been operating for nearly a decade before arriving in Oakhaven. Their pattern was consistent. They would move to a small, tight-knit community, integrate themselves, gain trust, and then begin selecting victims. Typically, these were travelers passing through town, homeless individuals, or others whose disappearances might go unnoticed or uninvestigated. In some cases, they had lured victims by offering jobs, shelter, or assistance. The Kestrel children presented a particularly troubling aspect of the case. Initially considered potential victims themselves, subjected to a lifetime of psychological conditioning by their parents, investigators soon uncovered evidence suggesting they were willing participants in the family's activities. Lyra's high school essays, seemingly innocent explorations of the nature of death and transcendence, took on sinister meanings when read in context of what had been happening in her home. Julian's detailed anatomical drawings, praised by teachers for their precision, were recognized by investigators as studies of actual victims. We found journals belonging to both children, Agent Rodriguez revealed. They documented their lessons with their parents, describing in detail what they learned about anatomy, chemistry, and what they called the preservation of human essence. They wrote about selecting subjects during family trips, how they helped lure them with their innocent appearances. These kids weren't innocent bystanders, they were apprentices. As the investigation expanded, authorities discovered that the Kestrels' periodic trips weren't vacations, but rather relocations of their operation. They maintained similar properties in 3 other states, each with its own converted well or underground structure. The total victim count across all locations eventually reached 43 confirmed individuals, with evidence suggesting there might be more. The town of Oakhaven, once proud of its community spirit and collective trust, was shattered. Residents who had welcomed the Kestrels, who had accepted their help and friendship, now questioned their own judgment. How could they have missed the signs? How could evil have lived among them, smiled at them across dinner tables, taught their children art. "I keep thinking about all the times they were in my home," Martha Vance said, her voice breaking. "Alara would bake with me in my kitchen. She borrowed my grandmother's rolling pin. Silas fixed my computer while sitting at my dining room table. Julian played with my cat. They were in my home, and all that time. What if I had been next? What if they had decided I would make a good subject for whatever twisted experiment they were conducting?" The manhunt for the Kestrel family became one of the largest in state history. Their faces appeared on news broadcasts nationwide. Their vehicles, financial accounts, and known associates were monitored. Border Patrol and international agencies were alerted. Yet, as days turned to weeks and weeks to months, the Kestrels seemed to have vanished without a trace. It wasn't until 14 months after their disappearance that the first confirmed sighting occurred. A gas station security camera in northern Montana captured images of Silas and Alara purchasing supplies and fuel. By the time authorities arrived, they were long gone, presumably headed for the Canadian border. The children were not seen with them, raising questions about whether the family had separated as part of their escape strategy. 3 months later, Canadian authorities discovered an abandoned cabin in a remote area of British Columbia. Evidence suggested the Kestrels had been living there, but had fled just days before the discovery. Among the items left behind was a journal, apparently belonging to Alara, which provided disturbing insights into the family's mindset. "We are not monsters," she had written. "We are pioneers. History has always feared its visionaries. Galileo was persecuted for suggesting the earth revolves around the sun. We will be vindicated when our work is complete. The boundary between life and death is not fixed, but permeable. We have glimpsed beyond it. Soon, we will breach it entirely, and humanity will understand. Until then, we must continue our work in shadows." Back in Oakhaven, the process of healing began slowly and painfully. The Kestrels' house on Willow Lane was eventually demolished after being thoroughly documented by investigators. In its place, the town created a memorial garden for the victims, many of whom remained unidentified, despite extensive DNA analysis and missing persons database searches. Sheriff Caldwell, haunted by his failure to detect the evil in his midst, retired the following year. "I shook Silas Kestrel's hand hundreds of times," he said in his final press conference. "I looked into his eyes and saw nothing but kindness. Either he was the most skilled deceiver I've ever encountered, or there's something fundamentally broken in how we perceive one another. Either way, I can't do this job anymore. I don't trust my judgment." Principal Fletcher implemented new security protocols at Oakhaven High School, requiring background checks that went beyond standard requirements for all staff and volunteers. "We can never let this happen again," she insisted. "The Kestrels used our trust as a weapon against us. They used our community's openness as a shield for their depravity. We must remain a community, but we must be a vigilant one." For many residents, the psychological impact proved unbearable. Dozens of families moved away in the months following the discovery, unable to continue living in a place now associated with such horror. Those who remained struggled with paranoia and suspicion. Community events, once the highlight of Oakhaven's calendar, were sparsely attended. People kept to themselves, hesitant to form new connections or trust new arrivals. Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychologist who provided counseling to Oakhaven residents, explained the profound trauma experienced by the community. What happened in Oakhaven wasn't just the discovery of a crime scene. It was the collective realization that everyone's ability to judge character, to determine who is safe and who isn't, had failed catastrophically. That creates a type of trauma that challenges our most basic assumptions about human connection. These people didn't just lose their sense of safety, they lost their faith in their own perceptions. 5 years after the Kestrels fled Oakhaven, the case remains open. International arrest warrants are still active. Sightings emerge from various countries, though none have been conclusively verified. Some investigators believe the family may have altered their appearances through surgery and assumed new identities. Others suspect they may have separated to reduce the risk of detection. The most troubling theory, proposed by FBI profilers, is that the Kestrels may have continued their work elsewhere, perhaps with greater caution and more elaborate covers. Lyris and Julian Kestrel would now be in their 20s. Their formative years spent apprenticed to killers, their moral compasses irreparably damaged. The possibility that they might be operating independently, applying the lessons learned from their parents, keeps investigators awake at night. For the residents of Oakhaven, the Kestrel case represents more than just a horrific crime. It's a wound in the collective psyche of the community, a fundamental breach of the social contract that binds people together. The town that once prided itself on its openness and trust now grapples with an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, the monsters wear the faces of friends. I still catch myself thinking about them with fondness sometimes, admitted Diane Lewis, Ilara's former colleague. I'll remember Ilara comforting a crying child, or Silas staying late to help set up for the school fair. And for a split second, I forget what they really were. Then the reality comes crashing back, and it's like discovering the truth all over again. I don't know if that feeling will ever completely go away. The old well behind the Kestrel house, once a quaint historical feature, has become a symbol of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most idyllic communities. The water that locals once believed had special properties had been contaminated in the most horrific way imaginable. What was once a source of life became a repository of death. As Oakhaven continues its slow journey toward recovery, residents have adopted a cautious philosophy, summed up by Martha Vance. We can't stop living, we can't stop trusting entirely, but we've learned that trust must be earned slowly, tested thoroughly, and never given blindly. The Kestrels taught us a terrible lesson, but we're determined not to let it destroy what makes a community worth having in the first place. The case of the Kestrels serves as a chilling reminder that evil often wears a charming face, that monsters can hide behind acts of generosity and kindness, and that the line between appearance and reality can be dangerously thin. For the people of Oakhaven, that reminder is etched into the very ground beneath their feet, in the empty space where a well once stood, and where the darkest secrets of their beloved neighbors were finally brought to light. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Kestrel case is not what was discovered, it's what remains unknown. What was the ultimate purpose of their experiments? Were they motivated solely by scientific curiosity, or was there something more? And most importantly, where are they now? As the 5th anniversary of their disappearance approaches, these questions loom larger than ever. The FBI has recently reassigned the case to a new task force specializing in long-term fugitives. Agent Melissa Harper, who leads the team, remains cautiously optimistic. Cases like this don't just go cold, she insists. People this distinctive, with such specific patterns and needs, eventually make mistakes. The Kestrels require certain chemicals, equipment, and privacy to continue. They need to establish identities convincing enough to allow them to integrate into communities. Each of these requirements creates potential points of detection. We're monitoring unusual purchases of preservation chemicals, tracking patterns in missing persons reports worldwide, and maintaining surveillance on individuals who had connections to the family. It's not a question of if they'll be found, but when. Until that day comes, the residents of Oakhaven live with uncertainty. Some report nightmares in which they encounter the Kestrels in other towns, living under new names but engaging in the same friendly, helpful behaviors that won them Oakhaven's trust. Others worry that the family might someday return to exact revenge on those who exposed their secrets. Harold Jenkins, the town historian, has perhaps the most philosophical perspective on the tragedy. Throughout history, communities have faced threats, disease, war, Natural disasters. These external dangers often bring people together, strengthening their bonds through shared hardship. But what the Kestrels did was uniquely destructive because it attacked the community from within. They weaponized our virtues, our openness, our trust, our willingness to welcome strangers. That's a different kind of trauma, one that's harder to heal from. It makes you question not just your safety, but your values. For new residents moving to Oakhaven, the Kestrel story is an unavoidable part of the town's identity. Local real estate agents are legally required to disclose the history of the Willow Lane property to potential buyers in the area. The case appears in criminology textbooks and has been the subject of numerous documentaries and true crime podcasts. Visitors sometimes come to see the memorial garden, treating it as a macabre tourist attraction despite the town council's efforts to discourage such interest. It's frustrating, admits Mayor Caroline Walsh, who took office after the scandal. We're more than this one terrible chapter in our history. Oakhaven is still a beautiful town with good people and a strong sense of community despite everything that happened. We're working to reclaim our identity, to be known for something more than just being the town the Kestrels deceived. That process of reclamation has taken various forms. The town has invested in revitalizing its historic Main Street, deliberately avoiding any association with the Kestrels. The elementary school where Alara volunteered has been renamed and renovated. The scholarship fund that Silas established has been repurposed with new criteria and oversight. Yet the shadows linger. On the anniversary of the discovery each year, residents note an unsettling quiet that falls over Oakhaven. Businesses close early, families stay home. The memorial garden receives fresh flowers from anonymous donors. It's a day of collective remembrance and reflection, a pause in the ongoing effort to move forward. For the families of the Kestrels' victims, moving forward proves even more challenging. Many remain unidentified, their remains unclaimed. For those who have been identified, their loved ones grapple with not only grief, but a particularly disturbing set of questions about their final moments. Lisa Morales, whose brother Miguel was identified as one of the more recent victims found in the well, struggles with these thoughts. The medical examiner couldn't tell me if Miguel was dead when they put him in that chemical bath. The idea that he might have been alive, that he might have suffered, that's what haunts me. I want the Kestrels found not just for justice, but because I need answers. I need to know why they chose my brother, what they did to him, whether he knew what was happening. Without those answers, there's no closure. The psychological profiles developed by FBI analysts offer little comfort to families like the Moraleses. According to these assessments, the Kestrels viewed their victims not as people, but as research materials. Their journals showed no recognition of the humanity of those they killed, no acknowledgement of the lives they were destroying or the grief they were causing. In their minds, they were conducting important work that transcended ordinary moral considerations, explained forensic psychologist Dr. Robert Keller, who consulted on the case. The Kestrels genuinely believed they were making discoveries that would eventually benefit humanity. This is not unusual in the psychology of certain types of killers. They create elaborate justifications that allow them to compartmentalize their actions. What makes the Kestrels unique is the degree to which their entire family shared this delusion, reinforcing it among themselves until it became their reality. The investigation into the Kestrels' background revealed that both Silas and Alara came from troubled families with histories of mental illness. Silas' father had been institutionalized for paranoid schizophrenia, characterized by religious delusions about resurrection. Alara's mother had been a nurse who lost her license after being caught experimenting with unauthorized treatments on patients. Their shared childhood traumas and complementary psychological disturbances created a folie à deux, a shared psychotic disorder that they then passed on to their children. It's a tragic cycle, Dr. Keller noted. The children never had a chance to develop normal moral frameworks. From their earliest memories, they were taught that what most of society considers monstrous was actually noble and necessary. By the time they were teenagers, they were fully indoctrinated into their parents' worldview. This understanding of the family's psychology has implications for the ongoing manhunt. If the Kestrels truly believe in the importance of their work, they are unlikely to have abandoned it, despite the risks. Their delusion would compel them to continue, perhaps with greater secrecy and caution, but with the same underlying purpose. In recent months, investigators have begun exploring a new angle based on this psychological assessment. Rather than focusing solely on the Kestrels themselves, they are monitoring scientific publications and online forums related to experimental preservation techniques, life extension research, and fringe theories about death and consciousness. The Kestrels' journals revealed they occasionally published aspects of their research under pseudonyms on obscure academic platforms, carefully disguising the true nature of their experiments. It's their Achilles heel, Agent Harper explained. Their need for validation, for recognition of their work, even if it comes from the fringes of the scientific community. Ego often undermines even the most careful criminals, and the Kestrels have very specific intellectual vanities that might lead them to take risks they otherwise wouldn't. This theory gained traction just last year when a paper published in a non-peer-reviewed online journal caught the attention of the FBI's analytical team. The article, authored by T.E. Wilford, entitled Novel Applications of Phenol Derivatives in Biological Preservation, contained methodological descriptions strikingly similar to techniques documented in the Kestrels' journals. Linguistic analysis suggested an 87% probability that Silas Kestrel was the author. The paper had been submitted from an IP address in Argentina, leading to an intensive search operation in the region around Buenos Aires. Though the Kestrels themselves were not located, investigators discovered an apartment that had been rented under one of their known aliases until just 2 months prior. Neighbors described a middle-aged couple who kept to themselves, but were unfailingly polite when encountered. They had claimed to be Canadian researchers on sabbatical. "We were close," Agent Harper acknowledged. "Not close enough. But it confirms our theory that they're continuing their activities and maintaining some connection to academic or pseudo-academic circles. It's only a matter of time before they make another mistake." For the residents of Oakhaven, these developments bring mixed emotions. The possibility of the Kestrels' capture offers potential closure, but also resurrects painful memories and forces the community to confront a history many would prefer to forget. "Part of me wants them found so they can face justice," said Roger Wilson, their former neighbor. But another part dreads the trial that would follow. The media circus, having to relive everything, having our town's name dragged through the news cycle again. It's selfish, I know, especially considering the victims' families who deserve answers. But it's honest. As Oakhaven approaches the 5-year mark since the discovery in the well, the town stands at a crossroads. The physical scars have largely healed. The Kestrel house is gone, replaced by the serene memorial garden. The property has been regraded with no visible sign of where the well once stood. But the psychological wounds remain tender, easily reopened by reminders of what happened there. Dr. Chen, who continues to work with affected community members, sees gradual progress. Healing from community trauma follows a different timeline than individual trauma, she observed. It requires collective processing, shared narratives, and the rebuilding of trust networks. Oakhaven is doing that work, slowly but surely. People are learning to trust again, but with a wisdom they didn't have before. It's not the same innocent trust they once had, and perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps that's growth. The town's annual festivals have resumed, though with subtle differences. Background checks for vendors and volunteers are now standard practice. Security cameras monitor public spaces. New residents find themselves subtly scrutinized before being fully embraced by the community. Trust is extended more cautiously, built over time rather than given freely. Yet amid these changes, moments of the old Oakhaven spirit occasionally emerge. When a fire destroyed the Wilson family home last winter, neighbors rallied to provide temporary housing, clothing, and essentials. When Hurricane Elsa caused flooding in the lower part of town, residents formed volunteer teams to help with cleanup and repairs. The capacity for collective action, for community support in times of crisis, remains intact despite the betrayal that shook its foundations. We're learning to distinguish between healthy trust and blind trust, explained Mayor Walsh. Healthy trust includes verification, appropriate boundaries, and mutual accountability. It's actually stronger than the blind trust we once had because it's based on genuine knowledge of one another rather than assumptions or wishful thinking. For younger residents who were children when the Kestrel case broke, the impact has been formative. Oakhaven High School now includes a curriculum unit on critical thinking and media literacy, teaching students to question appearances and verify information. The annual Ethics Symposium, established in the wake of the tragedy, brings speakers to discuss moral decision-making and the responsibilities of community membership. These kids are growing up with a different perspective, noted Principal Fletcher. They're more cautious, but also more thoughtful about what it means to be part of a community. They understand in a way their parents didn't that maintaining a healthy community requires active participation and vigilance, not just good intentions. As darkness falls over Oakhaven each night, lights shine from windows along tree-lined streets. Families gather for dinner, neighbors chat across fences, and life continues its steady rhythm. The town that loved the Kestrels has been forever changed by what was found in the well behind their home. But it has not been destroyed. In the memorial garden where the house once stood, a simple stone bears an inscription chosen by a committee of residents after much deliberation. It reads, "For those lost, for lessons learned, for a community that endures." No names are listed, not the Kestrels, not their victims. The absence of names represents both the unidentified dead and the unresolved nature of the tragedy itself. Visitors to the garden often comment on its peaceful atmosphere, at odds with the horrors that occurred on the site. Wildflowers bloom in carefully planned disarray. A small pond reflects the changing sky. Benches offer places for contemplation. It is a space transformed, where darkness has been acknowledged but not allowed to dominate. As Agent Harper and her team continue their search for the Kestrels, as families of victims wait for answers, and as Oakhaven works to redefine itself beyond the shadow of tragedy, the case remains a cautionary tale about the masks people wear and the secrets they keep. It reminds us that evil rarely announces itself, that it often hides behind smiles and good deeds, and that the boundary between normality and monstrosity can be thinner than we care to admit. The well behind the Kestrels' home has been filled in, sealed over, erased from the landscape. But the questions it raised continue to echo through Oakhaven and beyond. How well do we know our neighbors? What lies beneath the surface of the communities we build? And how do we move forward when trust has been so fundamentally betrayed? For the people of Oakhaven, there are no easy answers, only the daily work of rebuilding, not just their community, but their faith in one another and in their own judgment. It is work they approach with newfound caution, but also with determination, knowing that to abandon it would be to surrender to the darkness the Kestrels brought into their midst. As twilight settles over the memorial garden, Harold Jenkins often sits on his favorite bench, watching the last light fade from the sky. History isn't just what happened, he reflects. It's what we choose to remember and how we choose to tell the story. Oakhaven's story includes the Kestrels now. We can't change that. But it doesn't end with them. We get to write the next chapters, and that's what matters most. In those next chapters, Oakhaven seeks not to forget the past, but to learn from it, to grow beyond it, to ensure that no future family will ever be loved so blindly or trusted so completely as the Kestrels were. It is a hard-earned wisdom, paid for in blood and tears, but it is wisdom nonetheless. And somewhere, perhaps closer than anyone realizes, the Kestrels continue their dark work, moving through the world like sharks beneath the surface of calm waters. Their legacy in Oakhaven serves as a warning to communities everywhere. Look deeper, question more, trust but verify. For sometimes the monsters are not strangers lurking in shadows. They are the neighbors you welcome with open arms, the friends who sit at your table, the beloved family whose secrets remain hidden until the well runs dry. As for the Kestrels themselves, if they were to read this account, they would likely view it through the distorted lens of their shared delusion. They would see themselves not as villains, but as misunderstood visionaries. Their work not as atrocity, but as necessary sacrifice for a greater purpose only they can perceive. Such is the nature of the most dangerous kind of evil, the kind that believes with absolute conviction in its own righteousness. The search continues. The victims wait for justice, and Oakhaven endures, forever changed by the family it once loved and the secrets that lay hidden beneath their feet all along. The search for the Kestrels continues to this day, a constant reminder that justice remains elusive for the families of their victims. The FBI maintains an active file, with Agent Harper reviewing incoming tips and potential sightings weekly. International law enforcement agencies keep the Kestrels on their watch lists, though the trail has gone frustratingly cold since the discovery in Argentina. Some criminologists speculate that the family may have separated to reduce their visibility. It's entirely possible that Silas and Alara are operating independently from their children now, suggested criminal profiler Dr. Vanessa Torres. The children, now adults, would have been thoroughly indoctrinated into their parents' belief system, but might implement it differently, perhaps less cautiously, due to their youth. This creates multiple threat vectors that are harder to track simultaneously. This theory gained credibility when, in late 2013, a small private laboratory in Seattle was found abandoned after a routine fire inspection revealed concerning modifications to the building's ventilation system. The laboratory had been leased to a young woman using identification that was later determined to be fraudulent. Surveillance footage showed an individual whose physical characteristics were consistent with an aged-up version of Lyra Kestrel, though facial recognition results were inconclusive due to the subject's careful avoidance of camera angles. The Seattle laboratory contained equipment consistent with preservation experiments, Agent Harper confirmed. The techniques had evolved from what we documented in Oakhaven, but the underlying methodology showed clear continuity. Most concerning was evidence suggesting recent human tissue testing, though no victims were located on the premises. This discovery prompted a nationwide alert to chemical supply companies, medical equipment distributors, and property management firms, asking them to report suspicious purchases or rental applications matching specific patterns associated with the Kestrels' known behaviors. The initiative has generated dozens of leads, though none have yet resulted in apprehensions. For Oakhaven resident Beatrice Hammond, who still lives next door to the memorial garden that replaced the Kestrel home, vigilance has become a way of life. "I used to be embarrassed about how suspicious I've become," she admitted. "I keep detailed notes about new people who move into the neighborhood. I notice patterns, who has unusual deliveries, whose schedule seems irregular, who declines invitations to enter their home. But I'm not ashamed anymore. Being observant isn't the same as being paranoid. It's just being responsible." Hammond's attitude reflects a broader shift in Oakhaven's approach to community building. The town now balances openness with awareness, hospitality with healthy boundaries. New residents still receive welcome baskets and invitations to community events, but the unconditional trust that once characterized Oakhaven has been replaced by something more measured, more mature. We used to pride ourselves on accepting people at face value, explained Mayor Walsh. Now we understand that true community safety requires deeper engagement, not just accepting what people show you, but taking the time to truly know them. It's actually led to more meaningful connections in many ways, even if they develop more slowly. The Oakhaven case has become required study at the FBI Academy, with particular emphasis on how predators exploit the social dynamics of small towns. The Kestrel's method of infiltrating communities through apparent generosity and civic engagement has been documented as a sophisticated form of grooming, not just of individual victims, but of entire social systems. What the Kestrels did in Oakhaven was essentially create a community-wide blind spot, explained FBI instructor Special Agent Marcus Reynolds. They positioned themselves as such positive contributors that questioning their behavior became almost taboo. They weren't just hiding their activities. They were actively constructing a social environment in which they were above suspicion. It's a level of manipulation we rarely see executed so effectively. Law enforcement agencies across the country now provide training to local police departments on recognizing this pattern of community grooming and establishing protocols for vetting even the most seemingly benevolent new residents. Sheriff departments in rural areas receive particular attention, given the vulnerability of isolated communities to this type of infiltration. Elias Caldwell, Oakhaven's former sheriff, who retired after the case broke, has found a new purpose in consulting on these training programs. "I couldn't continue wearing the badge after missing what was happening right under my nose," he said. "But I can use my experience to help other law enforcement officers avoid the same mistakes." The Kestrels were masters of deception, but there were signs, subtle inconsistencies, explanations that were just a little too neat, patterns of behavior that should have raised questions. I'm teaching officers to look for those signs without becoming cynical or undermining the community trust that's essential to effective policing. For the victims' families, these educational efforts provide small comfort in the absence of justice. Miguel Morales' sister, Lisa, has channeled her grief into advocacy, founding an organization called Never Again that pushes for more thorough background checks and monitoring of chemical purchases. The group also maintains a database of missing persons cases that match the Kestrel's victim profile, working to identify potential connections that might otherwise be missed across jurisdictional boundaries. "The hardest part is knowing they're still out there," Lisa said. "Probably still killing, still experimenting, still believing in whatever twisted purpose drives them. Every time I hear about an unidentified body or a missing person who fits the pattern, I wonder if it's them. I wonder if another family is about to experience what Maine did." The psychological impact on Oakhaven's children has been a particular concern for parents and educators. Many who were young when the case broke are now teenagers. Their understanding of trust and community is shaped by the knowledge of what happened on Willow Lane. School counselor Rachel Bennett has observed the effects firsthand. "These kids grew up with the Kestrel case as part of their town's identity," she noted. "Some respond with heightened anxiety about strangers. Others show a precocious skepticism about people's motives. We're working to help them develop healthy caution without cynicism, to understand that what happened was an extreme outlier, not the norm for human behavior." The high school's ethics curriculum now includes discussions about moral responsibility within communities, examining questions like, when should you report concerning behavior? How do you balance respect for privacy with collective safety? What obligations do community members have toward one another? These conversations, difficult but necessary, are part of Oakhaven's effort to equip the next generation with tools to prevent history from repeating itself. In the Memorial Garden, a new addition appeared on the 5th anniversary of the discovery. A small reflection pool surrounded by stones bearing messages from community members. Some express grief, others anger. Many contain promises to remember, to remain vigilant, to protect one another. It has become a tradition for Oakhaven residents to visit the pool on significant dates, adding new stones, or simply sitting in contemplation. It's part of our healing process, explained Dr. Chen. Acknowledging the trauma collectively, expressing the complex emotions it generates, and recommitting to the values that define us, despite what happened here. These rituals might seem small, but they're powerful tools for community resilience. As night falls over Oakhaven, lights glow from windows along quiet streets. Families gather for dinner, neighbors check in on one another, and life continues its steady rhythm. The town has been changed by what was found in the well behind the Kestrel home, made more cautious perhaps, but also more intentional in how it builds and maintains community bonds. The old well itself has been completely erased from the landscape, filled in and covered over with layers of concrete before the memorial garden was created. But somewhere beneath the peaceful surface, its memory remains. A reminder of darkness hidden beneath an idyllic facade, of evil that wore the mask of kindness, of secrets kept until the waters rose and brought them, inevitably, to light. For investigators like Agent Harper, the case represents unfinished business, a puzzle still missing crucial pieces, a hunt without its quarry. For victims' families like the Moralises, it represents an open wound that cannot heal without closure. For Oakhaven residents, it represents both a cautionary tale and a testament to resilience, to the human capacity to rebuild trust, even after its most catastrophic betrayal. And for the Kestrels themselves, wherever they may be, it represents merely an interruption, a setback in what they perceive as their great work, their deluded quest to breach the boundary between life and death through the most unthinkable means. In their journals, Silas had written of setbacks before, of relocations necessitated by small minds, of the burden of a vision misunderstood by society. Their pathology suggests they view themselves not as fugitives, but as pioneers, forced underground by a world not ready for their discoveries. This perspective makes them all the more dangerous, driven not by impulse or passion, but by unwavering conviction in their purpose. It is what allowed them to maintain their facade in Oakhaven for years, to compartmentalize their research from their community personas, to engage in acts of exceptional cruelty while simultaneously performing acts of apparent kindness. The most dangerous people, Dr. Keller observed, are those who have constructed a moral framework in which their worst actions are justified, even necessary. The Kestrels believe they are working towards something transcendent, some breakthrough that would transform human understanding of life and death. This belief system allows them to view their victims not as people, but as stepping stones toward that goal. And that makes them uniquely resistant to doubt, remorse, or the kind of mistakes that typically lead to capture in cases like this. Despite these challenges, Agent Harper remains determined. Her office wall displays a map marked with possible Kestrel sightings, supply chain analysis of chemicals used in their preservation techniques, and profiles of missing persons who match their victims' selection patterns. It is painstaking work, following threads that often lead nowhere, but she approaches it with methodical persistence. Cases like this don't solve themselves, she said. They're solved through attention to detail, through recognizing patterns across seemingly unrelated data points, through maintaining focus even when leads go cold. The Kestrels have been exceptionally careful, but no one can maintain perfect vigilance forever. They'll make a mistake, and when they do, we'll be ready. Until that day comes, Oakhaven continues its journey of recovery. Not back to what it was before, but forward to something new. A community transformed by trauma, but not defined by it. The town that loved the Kestrels until the well ran dry, now learning to love itself again, scars and all. We don't talk about getting back to normal, Mayor Walsh explained. There's no going back to what Oakhaven was before. Instead, we talk about building something stronger, a community that's both warm and wise, both welcoming and watchful. The Kestrels exploited our trust, but they don't get to destroy it. That's a choice we make every day in how we relate to one another, in how we rebuild what was broken. As dawn breaks over the memorial garden, dew glistens on wildflowers planted where the well once stood. Life continues. The search goes on. And Oakhaven stands as both a warning and a promise, a reminder of humanity's vulnerability to deception and its capacity for resilience in the face of unimaginable betrayal. The story of the town that loved the Kestrels is not yet complete. The final chapter awaits writing, the chapter of justice, of closure, of answers to questions that still haunt victims' families and investigators alike. Until then, the lessons of Oakhaven echo beyond its boundaries, a cautionary tale for communities everywhere about the dangers that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most perfect-seeming neighbors. And somewhere, the Kestrels continue their dark work, moving through the world like wolves in sheep's clothing, their true nature hidden behind carefully constructed personas. The well behind their Oakhaven home has been filled, their secrets exposed, but their ultimate purpose remains obscured, a darkness still waiting to be brought fully into the light. This has been The Town Loved the Kestrels Until the Well Behind Their Home Was Emptied. Thank you for joining us on 13th Hour Tales. Remember to subscribe for more tales from the shadows, and until next time, keep your eyes open. For sometimes, the most frightening monsters are hiding in plain sight.